If you don't know who Stanley Grizzle is, settle in because author, academic, and journalist Cecil Foster is here on why everyone should know about this accomplished Canadian and his enduring legacy. Cecil Foster is professor and chair of the Department of Transnational Studies at the State University of New York at Buffalo and author most recently of They Call Me George, The Untold Story of Black Train Porters and the Birth of Modern Canada. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a fantastic book.
Well, thank you.
I want to talk to you about someone that features a lot in the book. I'm from Uganda. I came to Canada as a refugee, and now I'm a Canadian citizen.
Yes.
But I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for men like Mr. Stanley Grizzle.
Yes.
Why don't we know more about people like him?
A good question. I think that we don't know because there is still the hangover that Canada was, in fact, a white country, and it was primarily white people who made Canada. Even if we listen and participate in the multicultural dialogue in Canada, it is usually presented as a struggle between white French, white English. No other groups really mattered. Stanley Grizzle was right in the heart of that discussion on multiculturalism, on Canada, on what Canada ought to be, importantly. And he's just been left out like so many other non-whites who have been left out of that discussion. And I'm hoping that with this book that we can recalibrate and in a way look at history differently. And for me, look at history of Canada not in a romanticized sense, but as the result of the struggles that people of color have had to participate in, and certainly where people like Stan Grizzle, as noted in his book, My Name is Not George, some of which he outlined, but there's much more that we ought to know about Stan Grizzle and the people of that period.
And the title of his book referred to what train porters were called back in the day, and Stanley Grizzle was a train porter. What did he do? He was born of Jamaican parentage, but what did he do, and why should we know about Stanley Grizzle?
I like to think that what we should know about Stanley Grizzle is that he is responsible for many of us being here, for me being here in this country, for you coming from Uganda. And because remember that there was a time quite recently when Canada was intended to be a white man's country. If you were from Europe, and particularly from the UK, you had a free pass into Canada. In fact, some whites as well from the United States and the other dominions, the white dominions. But if you were British subjects from Uganda, from Kenya, from particularly the West Indies, which are so close, you could not get into Canada. And in 1954, Grizzle and a group that was called the Negro Citizenship Association, they went to Ottawa and they confronted the government of the day. And they said, look, your immigration policy is wrong. You cannot exclude all of humanity and try to make Canada exclusively for white people. History would not judge you well, morality would not judge you well, and ethically it's just poor politics. And they continued that fight for decades, and then ultimately they got the government to change the immigration policy that was based on merit. No longer was it based primarily on race. And as a result, that opened the door, and I like to think the result is the Canada that we encounter on the streets of places like Toronto, in Brampton, in Ajax, in Thunder Bay, across Canada, the Canada that is very multicultural.
So the book is called They Call Me George, and it's focusing on train porters because during that time, that was the only profession that Black men were allowed to pursue. And Mr. Grizzle was a train porter, correct?
Correct. And this goes back to the beginning of Canada, Confederation, and even before that, if we look at it continentally, to the ending of the Civil War in the United States. When many of the ex-slaves were unemployed, and there was a man by the name of George Pullman who took an idea that was first developed in Canada, that is of luxury train travel, and he said, look, you know, I can provide a kind of service where people can get on the train on the coast and travel right across the country to the other side, never having to get off, but they get impeccable luxury service. It was an elite service. They slept on the trains, they ate on the trains, they had their shoes polished, they were taken care of from head to toe.
And you're talking about the passengers.
These were the passengers. So to do that, to provide that service, he went to the southern United States and hired these ex-slaves, who were in fact like the slaves that were in the great homes. And he offered on the train a replication of that kind of antebellum service that you would get in the great houses in the South. So these men were really good domestics. And throughout the period, they were often taught by the railways to be good housekeepers. So when they work on the train, it was like they're inviting you into the great house. And you remain on the train. They provide you with everything of luxury that you would expect at the great house, and that was their job.
The passengers had a very different experience from the train porters, because the train porters had to also be impeccably dressed. They were all called George.
Yes.
They weren't paid very well. Some of them just lived on tips.
Yes.
They could live. They slept on the train. Mr. Grizzle was a train porter. How were they treated day to day?
The truth is, they were treated quite badly. There's two lore in the black history or in the black community about these train porters. Those who were perhaps the most envious of the lot, because it was still, because they got tips and they got money, it was still something that they aspired to, and at least they had work. So those who were envious would call them chambermaids and said, well, you guys are no more than chambermaids. You are cleaning up and dusting and doing things that you would not even do in your homes. Those so those were the envious lot. But
And that's
those,
coming from the black community.
in the black community. So there was this kind of ambivalence in the community. But for those who got the jobs and who aspired to be the jobs, these were people who brought back home money. They brought back home goods from out of town. Their kids at least had toys, and they had a life that others were envious of. And you know, there's a reason for that, because well into the 1960s and a part of the 70s, that was the only job that was available to black men. I mean, by the time we get to the 60s and 70s, we started to break down those barriers. But certainly until then...
Why couldn't they work anywhere else?
They couldn't work anywhere else because that's the way that the society was structuring itself. Now, when you read people like Bromley Armstrong and others who would tell the story of when arriving in Toronto and in the 1940s and then the 50s and wanting to find work and going to places like Eaton's and elsewhere, they were simply told, not here, but go to the railways. The railways are hiring, because those were the only jobs that were available to black males, early teens until about the 50s in age. Not to women, because women didn't so much work on the trains. They probably worked in the laundry rooms and elsewhere, but it was very much a male job. And it was a job where you started as a porter, and 20, 30, 40 years later, you ended your life as a porter. There wasn't the possibility of promotion.
To become a conductor.
To become
like
a conductor, because those were considered to be operational jobs. And the porters were not operational, they were service.
And no pension? Was there a pension?
There was no pension until very late in the day, by which time they became unionized. But because they were operational, they were not operational, they were service, it meant that, for example, the laws that would limit the number of hours consecutively that you could work didn't apply to them. So while they are called sleeping car porters, among themselves, they used to joke that they were sleepy car porters.
Because they never had any rest.
They never had a chance to sleep. And you can imagine them traveling across this great country. They're going across different time zones, different provinces, often in a 24-hour period, getting by on 3 hours sleep.
And they, when I was reading the book, one of the things of how they were supposed to conduct themselves was that the customer was always right. And if a customer said that a porter did something, that was it. The person ended up getting fired. If someone hears our conversation, and they hear that, they had consistent pay, they had work, they were able to take care of their families, they'll think, well, what's the problem? What happened? Why did Stanley Grizzle and the rest of the porters demand for more?
Excellent question. Because they wanted to enjoy the fullness of Canadian citizenship, the fullness of being a British subject. Now, many of them had come from the West Indies, where there was the growing sense of nationhood and of human rights and human dignity. And those who were living in Canada, because quite a number of the sleeping car porters were recruited from the West Indies. And many of them, when they came here, discovered that they were more dehumanized in Canada than in the West Indies and elsewhere. So they argued that as subjects, British subjects, they should get the same treatment as Canadians. Now, we're talking about the 1940s into the 1950s. This is when Canada is wrestling with the whole question of citizenship, where we are getting for the first time the codification of what is a Canadian subject or who can be a Canadian subject. And we are getting the notion that is a Canadian subject primarily going to be a white person and a British person, or are they going to bring in others and recognize them as citizens? And Grizzle and his colleagues were saying black people ought to be recognized fully as citizens, people of color. Now, one of the points that I will make on that, for example, at that time when they were advocating for the change in the approach of citizenship and immigration, because immigration decided who becomes the future citizens. Like, for example, at that time, there was a quota which said that from all of India, 150 people would be allowed in annually.
150.
150. The same number, 150, from Pakistan, and 50 from Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. And most years, Canada did not meet that quota. So that there were very few non-whites that were being allowed into the country. So Grizzle and others said, look, this is a question of citizenship. Why is it that someone like Brathwaite, Mr. Brathwaite from Barbados, who has worked all his life in Canada and been on the railroad, and would like to bring his granddaughter up from Barbados to spend time with him, why can't she come? Just simply because she is black, while you are denying Mr. Brathwaite his full citizenship. And those were the issues that they raised.
And that was one of the cases that you talked about in the book. Well, how in the end, how did they end up changing what Canada is?
Well, one of the things that they did, they were pretty successful after a while in getting the ear of people like John Diefenbaker, Prime Minister Diefenbaker, who was often referred to as the friend of the porters, especially on his long trips out to Alberta and back. He spent a lot of time with the porters and with Lester Pearson and then ultimately Pierre Trudeau. And what they did was to get Canada to recognize that a lot of the skills that were associated with good housekeeping, that these were skills that added to the economy, helped to meet needs in the economy, but also that the fact that those who ought to become Canadian ought not to be restricted based on racial or racialization. And that's where they made a big difference. And ultimately, they got Canada to, first of all, opened the doors by allowing domestic workers from the Caribbean in, and then ultimately we had people from Mexico, people from the Philippines, people from Eastern Europe and elsewhere who were left out. So the original domestic workers were from the West Indies, Jamaica and Barbados and Grenada and elsewhere. And then they got to the point where they got Canada to very much agree that when it is choosing immigrants from around the world, they would look at their ability. So that's why we get the point system, which says, what are your skills? What are your experiences? And you get points on
instead
it.
of color and we only have a few minutes.
And geography.
Yeah, we only have a few minutes, but Mr. Grizzle passed away a couple of years ago. What do you think his legacy will be?
For me, his legacy ought to be one of the founders of modern Canada, quite frankly, that people like him went out and instilled in Canadians the idea of who ought to be a true Canadian, and that Canada could reach its full potential by being a home to people of color from around the world, where people can work in the fraternity, in the brotherhood that he likes to talk about, so that the idea that we are all here, we might be different, but we can work together and be respectful of one another with no limits placed on our achievements.
Even after the Porter's issue passed on and he left the railway, Mr. Grizzle continued to work to fight for civil rights. To what extent has he been forgotten in this conversation of multicultural Canada?
I think that he has been forgotten from the point of view that we do not give him the credit that he deserves. I mean, we know that one or two places might still refer to him, that he ended his life before retirement as a citizenship judge. There might be one or two schools and places that are named after him. But I think that we really need to put him on a higher pedestal. And not only he alone, but that group of very ambitious Black men and women of the 1950s and 60s who set about to change Canada and against great odds succeeded.
There's so much to talk about in this book, and you're actually going to be coming back for a longer conversation with me in the summertime. But thank you so much, Mr. Foster, for giving us a snapshot of the legacy of Mr. Stanley Grizzle. We appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.